Hi, welcome to Talk About the Passion. I'm your host, Christian Campagna. Today's episode is the 47th episode, and it's a conversation with my friend Jeff Morris. I've known Jeff since the mid or late 80s. He was one of the original members of the Bruisers as their guitarist, and like a lot of people I've had on this podcast, someone I always ran into at shows around Boston, as well as during my stint at Rocket Records in beautiful Saugus, Mass. I've started unofficially calling these one-on-one episodes origin stories, and Jeff's story starts in Newburyport, Mass. We go through his younger years, discovering different types of music, going to hardcore shows, and end with the Bruisers doing a couple of shows this November in 2019. On a side note, Jeff briefly talks about a festival called the Sound of Revolution Festival, also in November. The Bruisers were scheduled to play, but they're not. And there's a explanation of that on if you look on the Bruisers social media. When I think of records that bring me back to a certain period in my life and still hold up to this day, the Bruisers, Cruisin' for a Bruisin' is definitely one of those. It was released, a few years after I was shaving my head and wearing boots and braces, but the whole record sort of feels like that part of my life, and I can still listen to it today and get that same feeling, It's a perfect mix of, punk rock and roll that's just catchy as hell and memorable from start to finish. I try to never fanboy out over people I have on the podcast, especially if I know them anyway. But this record is definitely one of my favorites. So, yeah. Couple more things and then I'll shut up. You can follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Just search for Talk About the Passion Podcast. You can listen to this podcast on all platforms like Apple Music, Podbean, and even Spotify now. If you or someone you know would like to be on an episode of this, please reach out and we can set something up. I'm always looking to do these origin stories, but also if you have an idea you want to talk about here, I'm up for that as well. I'm planning an Iron Maiden episode soon with a past guest, so that should be cool. Anyway, let's get this started. Episode 47, till the end with Jeff Morris. Thanks for listening. All right, so I am here with Jeff Morris. Well, you're in Chicago or just Illinois or where?
Yeah, well, I'm in the Northwest Burbs. It's like saying, if you live in Saugus and saying you're from Boston,
Okay, yeah, the Saugus of Chicago.
It's better than that, but yeah, okay. Mile-wise.
And you and I have known each other since probably the mid-'80s or late '80s.
At least, at the very latest, 88.
Yeah. I was a North Shore, punk rock, hardcore kid or whatever, and then at one point we started moving sort of north to hang out with kids from Beverly and Salem, Beverly Farms, and then we got up to Newburyport, and there was a small scene up there, and I think that's probably where we met. Were you in that band NPD?
Yeah, that was NPD was it was the evolution of two or three bands that I had started before then. I had a band with the same guys called Psychotic Youth, and then we realized there was a band from like Sweden called that, so we changed the name to Suburban Massacre.
Oh, okay.
And then that was a bad idea, so we went with NPD, which became probably when we met.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And you grew up in Newburyport?
Yeah, that's where I'm from.
Okay, cool. And getting into music up there, and how did you do that in that area?
Well, getting into music, I mean, it depends on what we want to start with. I mean, if you want to talk about music in general, I think the first time I became sort of passionate about anything was probably like sixth grade when we had what we called Spark, which was sort of a free period in school, and some kid, Glenn, brought a tape of Jimi Hendrix smash hits on his boombox, and I was just fucking amazed. I mean, literally, it was an epiphany for me.
Yeah.
And 2 years later, it was actually kind of funny. I'm up at March's Hill in Newburyport, doing the stuff that you do in the woods, and it was sort of like that, what the fuck was that movie in the 80s? The Gods Must Be Crazy or whatever, when the Coke bottle falls out of the...
Yeah.
So out of nowhere, I'm up there, going through finding like used porn mags and stuff, and all of a sudden I come up with this guitar neck.
Right.
Why is there a guitar neck in the middle of the woods? So I take that home, of course, and I went to wood shop and I built the body for it, and I think I bought a bridge down at the record store, and made myself my first guitar, and nice. It had literally like plastic, Formica fake pickups that didn't really work. But I mean, I strung it up and everything.
Yeah, nice.
So I did that, and we could probably skip the rest. But I mean, I think, I was friends with a bunch of skater guys. Yeah. Everyone was into like the VHS tapes of the California punk bands and guys ripping it up, and at some point there was probably like Gang Green was on one of the tapes, and somebody had a subscription to a zine, probably Al Quince or something, and we found out there was a club in Boston called, The Rat or The Channel or something like that, and went in to see this band called Gang Green, and like, holy shit, like, wow, this is amazing, And that was probably the first punk band I saw. Was probably Gang Green. I'm guessing it was The Channel. I think it was The Channel, probably like 86, 87 maybe. Right. Probably 86.
Yeah. And were you into like bigger, like did you see big concerts before that when you were younger?
I didn't really know. I mean, I think I saw like Bo Diddley at my high school auditorium.
Oh, nice.
Which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But I think the first concert per se was, well, not a concert, but backyard party. There's a guy in Newport who doesn't get enough credit. This guy's named Chris Sawtell. He's a friend of mine, very good friend of mine. He threw a backyard party. I'm going to say it was 85, 86. And all the guys from Portsmouth and Dover, specifically Dover, actually came down. So the bands that played that night were the Murderers, nice. VFW, and Five Balls of Power. Some of those bands ended up on like Mystic Sampler comps and stuff like that. Yeah. But so that's how I met those guys. And we're all, dancing in the backyard and getting dirty and stuff.
Right.
And I remember Joel Mole, who played guitar for VFW, later on played with the Queers and some other bands. Met him that night. Statute of limitations may still apply, so I'll stop there on what might or might not have happened with the vodka bottle and a jock's head. So that's where I was introduced to those guys who then, when we made NPD, I'm still this metalhead. I sort of skipped that part, but I was, as a young high school kid, I was going to like, Motley Crue.
You were talking about that on Facebook.
Motley Crue at the Worcester Centrum, or Manning Bowl and Lynn with Accept and Y&T, and Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, all the greats, all the really easy, accessible metal bands. So I was doing that stuff, and when I started going to the Channel, and probably the first time I saw Slapshot was like at Brandeis.
Oh yeah.
I think it was Brandeis or Tufts maybe. One or the other. They opened for Circle Jerks, and Moving Targets opened the show.
Yeah.
I remember Ken Chambers saying something like, "Hey, thanks to Steve Rustine for letting me borrow his Marshall."
Right.
Blah blah blah. And I was really into the Moving Targets. I hadn't seen them before. It was my first time.
Yeah.
And I went and bought the tape. Their Burning and Water tape from him afterwards.
Yeah.
And I tried to be cool, as a kid. I'm like, hey, you guys really remind me of like that band Husker Du. You know Husker Du? You know who they are?
Yeah.
And Ken kind of like, he was nice. He was like, yeah, that's great, but you should probably try to check out, like, I don't know, Mission of Burma.
Right.
And I'm still not into them. The Mission of Burma is kind of like the Smiths to me. I don't know. It's one of those bands that that did some good stuff, but it's like, I'm all set.
Yeah, past you.
But I don't know where I was going with all this. Where were we?
Talking about seeing the Circle Jerks and Steve Rustine borrowing.
Oh yeah,
Ken Chambers borrowing Steve's amp.
Yeah, there was a black dude at that show that jumped off the PA, and like they had to bring the EMTs in because he was out out. I mean, he might have broke his spine. I have no idea. He got really fucked up. So the funny thing was, I had this Bundeswehr jacket that I had hand painted Slapshot with the crossed hockey sticks on the back and this huge jacket.
Nice.
And I'm standing there and I had a hood on.
Right.
And the great thing was Slapshot comes out. Like at that time I had probably bought Back on the Map and I was cranking it at home. And so Slapshot comes out and memory tells me there were 100, but there was probably more like 15 skinheads standing on the stage with their backs to the audience. And they start in with the Back on the Map thing, which, if you can picture it in your head, I think is probably just like Mark on the hi-hat, and a little bit of muted chords, maybe a little bit of bass, before it goes crazy. And as soon as the drums go, ba-da-da-da-da-da, everyone turns around and stage dives, and they went ape shit. And that was it. I was sold. I'm like, I'm in. Whatever. But the funny thing was, so this guy comes up behind me. I don't know who he was, skinhead kid in their crew. And he taps me on the shoulder and he goes, "Hey man, that jacket." And he pulled me around. I turned and I like I said, I had a fucking big mullet. And he goes, "You got hair. I'll see you in the pit."
Oh my God. That sounds like a scene out of that Suburbia movie or some shit.
Oh, it was exactly that. It was like that girl getting her dress ripped off, except it was my jacket. But actually that had happened before Slapshot's set. But I didn't see him in the pit. He was not to be found, or maybe I wasn't. But that was sort of my holy shit moment, I think.
Yeah. And that was when, and I feel like this has been a theme on a lot of episodes, when, it's kind of almost like a cliche, but when the hardcore scene was actually kind of, dangerous, a different kind of dangerous than other eras of it. But there was just that feel, it was addictive. You wanted something fucked up to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you were some like Lower East Side street urchin, that wouldn't have been a big deal to you. You can get that anywhere, right? But where I'm from, I had a really kind of a weird sense, because on the one hand I was an athlete, but on the other hand I was a guitar player and I wanted to play music, and I was the kid that was wearing not Slapshot, but like Sex Pistols t-shirts to high school, and being told I had to turn it inside out, crap like that, stupid stuff. And when I went to that, I remember that show, maybe a few others I could probably think of, where it was like, I could get my ass kicked. In fact, I think I'm probably going to. And you know what? I'm not a big tough guy, but I can take a punch. But this is going to be fucking fun either way. I'm going to enjoy this.
Actually going in the pit then was, because I was never a fighter. I was never a fighting person. I never really got into that. And but I did like to go in the pit and just do that. That was
and the other thing was, like, I think I mentioned to you before, there's not very much separation sometimes between like the sneaker skins and the jocks. They were
definitely
pretty much cut from the same bolt of cloth. And, and I didn't want anything to do with that. When I decided I wanted to do it, I went in with both feet, or both size 14 docks, and we were trying to be trad. I don't want nothing to do with that, tuck your pants into your high tops and champion sweatshirt stuff until I heard Warzone. 1989, Warzone came up to the Rat. And here I am, 14 docks, white Fred Perry, red braces, and we're standing there before Warzone played. Rabies walks out. He's got his hoodie pulled down way low. You can't even see his eyeballs. And he's just walking around the crowd, chin to chin. We're just stopping in front of guys like me, like chin to chin, just like challenging us. Like, are you guys going to bring it? Because I'm going to bring it. Are you going to fucking answer the call or not? And when that show started, I mean, holy crap, that was insane. And that's when I earned some, or didn't earn, I became mindful of the fact that, these guys, these Lower East Side guys, they got a different aesthetic. And they're mixing with like the Run DMZ people. So it was really cool. And And I realized, like, yeah, it's not just they're not just like jocks; they're actually street kids.
Yeah.
But they're just different street kids.
Yeah.
So that I kind of that opened my eyes a little bit.
Yeah. I think the first time I saw Agnostic Front was they came here and played it was like a YWCA, and there was a big fight, but those guys were and even when I bought that first record, I mean they were legitimately scary looking guys. I'm thinking like, wow, these New York guys, because I was used to DC.
Which tour was that?
It was one of the first times. Excuse me. It was one of the first times they came here. It must have been early on. I think it was around Victim in Pain. I think because it was.
Oh shit! I wish I could have seen him then.
I think it was '84. It was like my first year of going to shows, and I was 14, and that was it was a scary.
Yeah, I was at the Centrum watching Aerosmith and Dawkins. Yeah.
Yeah, I was probably doing that as well. Going to see Triumph and shit like that. But
I never saw Triumph, but I love that band. Well, I like the band.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, they were pretty good. But yeah, coming from Newburyport, and I lived in Swampscott, so
yeah,
it was cool.
Hey, did you know? Since you mentioned Swampscott, remember Sharky and Eric and those guys?
Yeah. Yep.
They were part of our early NPD days.
Yeah. Eric Washburn?
Oh, Christ, I don't know.
Yeah. Eric Washburn from Beverly. But Sharky with the that was Tom with the
Yeah, exactly.
Tom was a good friend of mine. He was on the
Didn't he go in the Marines and he went over to Desert Storm?
He went to the Army. I don't know if he went to Desert Storm.
I remember him no, it was definitely him telling me that they went over there and they had nothing to do. They were driving around in the fucking desert. They wanted to shoot something.
Right.
So they finally just started shooting animals that they saw.
Yeah, that sounds.
Anyway, I get sidetracked.
Yeah, we had fun though. It was that era of the scene. I think was a good time. And now you had built that guitar early on, and did you start actually taking guitar seriously after that?
I've yet to take guitar seriously, actually. No, I think that what the funny part was. So there was this punk in my town called named Dan Sheehan.
Yeah.
The Brits say called. When you ask what someone's name is, they'll say called every time. If you ask an American what's someone, they'll say, oh, he's named such and such. That's just a peculiar thing.
Yeah.
I'm like that.
Right.
So this guy's named Dan Sheehan, old school punk, big mohawk. They lived in the apartment behind me, and I'm in my backyard strumming my shitty homemade guitar, and he's sitting out there ripping butts, and he's like, hey, man, great axe. That thing looks killer. And I'm like, my whole default setting since I was a little kid is this guy fucking with me? Is he making fun of me, or is he mean it?
Right.
And that pretty much informs every decision I've ever made. So, but I'm like, yeah, great. And I think in a weird way that kind of encouraged me. And I think for my birthday that year, I said to my mother, I got to get a guitar.
Yeah.
So let's make this happen. So we went over to Amesbury Music Center, came home with an Aria Pro 2.
Oh, nice. Yep.
CS250, cost, I don't know, $79.
Right.
And a battery-powered 9-volt amp that clipped onto my belt.
Right.
And I drove the neighborhood fucking crazy with that. I was cranking. There were a couple of records that I played to death trying to play along to. It was, Jimi Hendrix Band of Gypsies was one.
Nice.
Peter Frampton Comes Alive was another. Usually Do You Feel Like We Do, because he played really slow and I could kind of figure it out.
Right.
Pretty much those two for years. And it wasn't for a long time that I realized how to tune my guitar. My friend Steve Fowler came over and he's like, you're not doing that right. What do you mean? And I was probably 17 when I realized I was playing. I would tune two strings to each other, and the next two strings would be like down, 2 whole notes or some bullshit.
Right.
So that was my start. And from there, got a couple other ones.
Right. And then, so NPD was a hardcore band, right? For
I mean, we
non-police.
We tried to.
Is that what it was?
Depends on the day, but ultimately that was probably the right one.
Right.
And that was Dan, who plays with the Bruisers.
Yep.
Dan Connors, he played drums. Scotty Davies, who formed the Bruisers with Al, was also our bass player. Later on, at the very end, Al Quint played bass for us for a cup of tea.
Yeah.
We were trying to be, I don't know, youth of Warzone, I guess.
Yeah.
And we did get shows. We played with like Uniform Choice of the Rat. We played with Slapshot over at Bun Ratties.
Yeah.
Some shows up in Dover with those guys like the Queers and Murderers and VFW and some of the aforementioned. But yeah, ultimately that was still going on when the Bruisers started, and Scotty, he had a foot in both camps, said, "Hey, we need a guitar player."
Yeah.
They had tried out a few people, a girl who's a great girl, but she didn't fit the bill, and another guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Yeah, I can do it."
Yeah.
And he looked at my guitar. I was playing a Charvel, which is black on black, very pointy headstock. And he's like, "Yeah, you're welcome to come play with us, but yeah, that fucking guitar is not happening."
Yeah.
And he was right. So I brought my Strat instead,
Nice.
and that's the Strat that I played on the first record.
Nice. So then the Bruisers sort of became your full-time gig at that point.
Yeah, that was it. That became it.
Nice. Did you guys record at? I think one of my old bands recorded with Bobcat. Did you guys ever record up there?
We did. At first, the first two records we did, or the 7-inch, the Intimidation 7-inch, and then the Independence Day tape, we did at the Bunkhouse, which was an abandoned mattress factory in Portsmouth.
Right.
But then my friend Tyler hooked us up. He was good friends with Bob, and we went over to Bobcats in Seabrook and recorded the American Night.
Yeah. We
recorded a couple of singles there, and then the Up in Flames record was recorded there too.
Oh, nice. And he was a cool... No, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, for anyone that doesn't know, that this guy Bob was played in a Rush cover band, and he was the Geddy Lee, right? He was the... Oh,
Bob still to this day, he's very active. He plays bass in a really popular, very, as far as I can tell, money-earning country band.
Oh, does he?
But
nice.
Yeah, if you walked into Bobcat, though, the funny thing was on the back wall by there was a back little booth back there. There was an album on the wall by Squadron. Do you remember that?
No.
Squadron was his band.
His early.
Yeah. In the 70s, he played in Squadron. And go on Discogs and look up Squadron. I wish I could remember the name of the record.
Yeah.
They're all wearing silver. I think they're wigs. I hope they're wigs. And red unitards.
Oh, nice.
Oh my God, it's hot. But actually, the music's good. Yeah. I checked them out on YouTube. It's good. Huh. And it's Bob Catalano. Bob is the most patient, easygoing, fun-loving guy.
Yeah.
I've never heard him raise his voice or had anything bad to say, even though he's had many, many reasons with us.
Yeah. Same here. I remember just...
But we recorded Bruisers, at least a couple records there. Then later on, I recorded with my other band after that.
Oh,
so
nice.
Cadillac Kidman. So
yeah, he was patient, and I remember thinking that, like, is he gonna not, because we were a punk rock band. I think I recorded there with, I don't even remember which band it was, but yeah, he was and I was like, thinking like he must hate this, but it was his job. And he enjoyed doing that.
I think musically, because the thing is, you're right. When you go back to, he had a band, I think it was Moving Pictures, and they did it. It was a Rush tribute act.
Yeah.
I mean, they had it down. They had
I think he had
a major light show and the whole 9 yards that they would bring out.
Yeah.
And picture him covering Geddy Lee's parts and singing it perfectly. Perfectly.
Yeah.
Doing the bass pedals and the whole thing.
Pedal, yeah.
And this guy is a pro's pro.
Yeah.
And then we show up.
Yeah.
And we don't have a tuner. Like I'm practicing for Bruisers songs. I'm trying to like relearn these songs that I forgot 20 years ago.
Right.
And I'm like, I cue them up on the thing. I'm like, wait a minute, what the fuck? Are we doing drop D? No, it's not drop D. It's like, it's just, it's like drop fucking C sharp plus a few cents. I don't know what the hell it was.
And so with the Bruisers, you know, a lot of people say you sort of started this street punk or, you know, American Oi and that kind of thing. With me, I always thought it was just good rock, like just rock. You know, I always thought you were just a great rock guitar player. And
well, thank you. There's a bunch of different eras, though. I think you have to kind of segment it.
Right.
I mean, when the band started, it was Scotty and Al's fingerprints.
Right.
I was literally showing up and they told me what to play.
Right.
Like on the first record, we did Anchors Up was the only song that we had a quote unquote solo on.
Right.
And I remember playing, and Dan wasn't the drummer yet, but he was at practice and Roger was our drummer. Yeah. And I played something, I think, let's just say it was an A, I have no idea. Right. And I was up the neck, like above the 12th fret, and Dan just shook his head. Dan was still is a man of few words. Yeah. But he just shook his head and looked at his shoes, and I'm like, fuck, that sucked. and then Scotty was like, yeah, that was nice.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
You know, what the fuck are you doing? That's not this band. So then I was like, all right, so if I'm going to play a lead, I need to stay like between the 1st and the 5th fret.
Yeah.
And not wank as much as I want to. So that's what I did.
Yeah.
So that was the first era. That was very inspired by the Blitz.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Bands like Blitz. I mean, the Intimidation record was very informed by that.
Yeah.
Not just them, but you know, we could talk all day. But so then, I started writing songs on the Independence Day record, which was the cassette that came out, and that was probably for me. At the time, my biggest influence was the Jam.
Yeah,
I was listening to the Jam, maybe not musically, but at least in terms of, I always thought the Jam was an Oi band that never got painted with that terrible turn.
Oh, right, yeah.
I mean, Weller's like Man in the Corner Shop, you know, all those songs were all about working class, and it dovetailed perfectly with, at the time I was really hardcore into like George Orwell, not the 1984 and Animal Farm stuff, but like the Keep the Aspidistra Flying, Coming Up for Air, where you have just these tales of, you know, penury or middle class barely existence, but yet they're going to keep that aspidistra in the window so the neighbors think they're making it. You know, got to keep up appearances and keep coming up, and that was to me what I was trying to write about. You know, and so then. I remember reading like that. The next one was the first record we did at Bob's Place was American Night.
Right.
And it was a guy in Indiana had a zine. It was awful. I'm not even going to mention him.
Right.
He's an idiot. But the review was kind of funny. He said something like, "Yeah, where have the Bruisers been hiding this power all these years? This is the first record that has, you know, this power behind it." He wasn't wrong.
Right.
That was the first record that we had Rick on guitar.
Yeah.
And Todd on bass.
Yeah.
Not that I don't think Todd's bass work changed anything, but Rick brought to the band.
Great,
Rick brought this, and at first, or not even at first, but probably his entire time in the band, he and I fought over the fact that I'd be writing these changes, and whenever possible, he would palm mute.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, Rick, chug it. I'd look at him, it's like, Rick, we're not playing Ride the Fucking Lightning, pal. You know?
Yeah.
But the irony was that it's not ironic, but whatever. In hindsight, it was perfect.
Yeah.
Because here I was playing these like open major chords, you know, G, C, D, blah, 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 F. And Rick's holding down that rhythm with the palm muting. And the genius of it was that the two counterpoints worked.
Yeah.
If we were both trying to be Malcolm instead of Angus, it wouldn't work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I give him so much credit in hindsight that I didn't get at the time. He brought something really that was necessary.
Yeah.
And that was that power that came in that record.
Yeah. And he was a good dude. He was a teddy bear, I thought.
Oh, for sure.
Definitely. So the Bruisers we sort of talked a little about this with just, you know, we were both in the hardcore scene, and we were, you know, skinheads dressed that way, and, you know, if we were going to label ourselves, and that was sort of a scene, and it got to a point where, at least for me years later, I just got sick of having to explain to people, even like as I get older now, like I have, fucking tattoos, and I'm like, I'm dating a younger woman years ago, and she's like, "Is this
God bless you.
Yeah, is this a United States skinheads on your chest?" Like it's small, but I'm like, yeah. She's like, what's that all about? Like
Yeah.
most people think it's Nazis. So it got to a point where having to explain like the difference, and this was just kind of tiring, and that you guys obviously weren't that that part of. But we were talking before we hit record that there was a book that came out, American Hardcore.
Oh yeah.
It talked about the Bruisers, and it mentioned, I think it said that a white power band, the Bruisers, and which I thought was pretty irresponsible and ridiculous. And at the time, there was very little like media about hardcore, so it was cool to get this book. Like, wow, a book on hardcore, and this is like the only one. And then there was a few things, but that one stood out to me that this is kind of shitty.
I think we were all excited when that book came out because it was like, oh crap, someone's writing a book about us.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what year that was, but
right.
Whatever year it was. I know Al was already with the Dropkicks because we were done. And I got a call from him one night about this. Someone had turned him onto it.
Right.
I hadn't picked the book up yet, but I was aware of it.
Right.
So I went down to Newbury Comics. I grabbed a copy. It was the first printing, and sure enough, I saw what you saw: New Hampshire skinhead white power band, or something to that effect. So in my own way, I went back to my place and I typed up a letter.
Yeah.
Found him, sent him a letter. Actually, I think email might have been a thing at that point. I might have sent him an email.
Right.
And so I sent him an email saying, for all intents and purposes, you didn't do your homework. It's shoddy journalism, if I can even use that term.
Right.
Some of us have careers in music still, Al.
Yeah.
Some of us have children, me. Al might have been a father at that point. I think he probably was at that point, but young kids.
Yeah.
But the whole point being, this is not just a slight.
Right.
If you're in the band Blink 182, when someone says, "Oh, dude, you're wearing, sneakers that are made by child labor," that's bullshit.
Right.
Okay, you could probably get past that and just laugh your way up.
Right.
But if you're in a band that had to deal with, you go back, put it in context, Look at when Pete Morrissey sings "Here We Are in 1989" when being a skinhead's like committing a crime. Yeah. He's not kidding.
Right. Yeah.
Those were the Geraldo chair in the face.
Yeah, that was
all that stuff. Yeah. And for us to be in print in what we were really looking forward to as like, wow, someone made a book about hardcore. Holy shit. Yeah. This is a big deal. Like I'm gonna buy this. Is gonna be, when I'm an old man, gray like I am today, it's gonna be on my bookcase and I'll refer to it.
Yeah.
Well, there I am in black and white as a fucking white power skinhead.
Right.
So anyway, I wrote an email to him and his publisher, and I said all those things that I mentioned, and I said I probably threatened him to something about you'll be hearing from Vinny Boombots, my attorney, if you don't cut the crap.
Right.
And sure enough, he did respond.
Yeah.
And his response was really inadequate, but he said, "Okay, fine, I'll delete you from the next pressing."
Oh, Jesus.
And he did. So he deleted it. We weren't mentioned in the following pressings, but if you have an original first pressing, we're still there as White Power Band.
I think the one I have is that.
Is bullshit, but
it is what it is at this point.
Yeah.
But that is the kind of thing that stretches into, it's in a book forever. So.
Right.
But
fortunately, I think very few people bought it. Relatively. I'm not trying to talk crap about the guy. It was not important, but it was cool to have a book about our scene.
Yeah.
And let's say the first pressing was, I don't know, for the sake of argument, 5,000 copies. Who knows?
Yeah.
So maybe there are 5,000 copies out there that say that, and hopefully 4,500 of those people don't know who we were and don't give a shit.
Exactly.
The 500 who have heard the band's name
Right.
Maybe 300 think it's true and 200 know better.
Right.
So I'll never meet those 300 people. So whatever.
Right. And so with the Bruisers, you guys got pretty popular. And do you remember sort of the first time playing, like, sort of a big show where you're like, wow, this is actually a thing now? Like
I don't know. I mean, like, do you really want to use the word popular? Because I don't think it's true. I mean,
I mean, you guys weren't selling out stadiums, but I think you had a pretty big following, and
I don't know. I mean, I think we were fortunate to get, and I put this on Rick especially when he went to Boston.
Yeah.
From New Hampshire and Maine, he went down to Boston and started. I think he was doing work at the Middle East and whatnot, at the Rat Navy too.
Yeah.
And got us really good support gigs for important shows, and that was huge.
Yeah.
That's sort of when
playing those kind of shows.
Yeah. So when AF came to town, we played with them. When Sheer Terror came to town, we played with them.
Yeah.
When Bad Brains came to town, we played with them too, even though it was Israel, but still Israel was good. I liked it.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was a channel show, right?
No, that was New Hampshire.
Oh,
but actually,
okay.
I did go to that show at the channel.
Yeah.
Bad Brains were like an hour and a half late.
Yeah.
We're all standing around, and to this day, with a few of my friends, we're always like, it's an inside joke, like, oh, I'm just going to take my Bad Brains time, because at the time Mackie was playing drums for them.
Yeah.
And they showed up, and they're an hour and a half late,
right.
For whatever reason.
Right.
And you'd think if you're an hour and a half late and everyone stayed, that you just kind of get your shit out there and say thank you very much for hanging around. And here, 1, 2, 3, 4. But instead, Mackie comes out and starts setting his drums up, and I swear to God, he took 5-10 minutes to tune every fucking drum.
Right.
And we're in the crowd like, this guy's a legend, but
right.
my patience really does have a limit.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think probably the first time that we played a gig when I was like, wow, this is amazing. Good question. I mean, we did a few. I think probably the AF shows, because that band was so important. And they took a shine to us. I mean, Vinny was immediately a great friend.
Yeah.
Like right off the bat.
Yeah.
No time at all. Right in the door.
Yeah.
And I think it wasn't even a few shows that we played together before he had given Rick Iron Chin.
Yeah.
And then Rick was like, hey, Vinny gave me this fucking song. Let's do it,
That's awesome.
So yeah, definitely the AF shows, probably like Man Ray, even Salisbury Beach. We played Salisbury Beach with them. It was like 600 kids showed up.
That's awesome.
It's insane.
I think too in the hardcore scene then, and I mean maybe now I'm not really that into that at this point, but at that era, I feel like every band on a bill was just as important to, especially if it was local bands, because most of the time they were your friends, and we were lucky enough to have talented friends like the Bruisers and the Wrecking Crew and Psycho, and
hell yeah,
all these bands, and some of them never went on to be like headlining bands, but they were just as Psycho was one of those. They still out there.
Psycho opened every show I ever went to.
Exactly.
And they were awesome every time.
Yeah. I saw them
I love that band. I mean, in fact, Mike from NPD, the singer from NPD, got up and sang PMS with them at the Channel one time.
Nice.
I remember it was hysterical.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, those were the times when you assembled a bill.
Yeah.
You did it with purpose. Like you thought, okay, who's the good? First of all, if you're a touring band, let's say AF's coming to town, they don't need help. But if they were thinking of it, they'd say, okay, who's gonna sell an additional 50 tickets? They'd say, okay, Wrecking Crew. Let's put Wrecking Crew on there.
Yeah.
Okay, and besides them, who are two up and coming, really good bands that nobody knows that we want to put on a stage with us to give them credibility and to give them experience. And that's the way you put a bill together.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's the way it is today. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I hit shows here and there, but I guess not like traditional hardcore at this point or whatever, And I know that still exists out there. I just...
it probably does.
Yeah, I haven't been involved in it as much. But.
But I mean, at this point, I have to mention, guys like John Regan and and Sean McNally. I mean, those guys were orchestrating these gigs.
Gitter and
Gitter, definitely.
Do you remember Mark Johnson from? He was in that band Executioner, but he was one of the first guys.
I don't think so.
Yeah, he was in that band Executioner, and he was booking that Hannum Hall place where the Sam Hain played, and then. But he did a bunch of shows where, he kind of started mixing metal bands with hardcore bands, and that's sort of when I met Keith Bennett and Greg Delirier and those guys. And that era of.
But I remember listening to your thing with Kevin Norton, and you were talking about how metal and or at least thrash and hardcore could coexist.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you went to the Channel to a matinee, it was funny. Like you'd be at the matinee at the Channel, and let's say Suicidal was playing that day, or it could be anybody. Pick a band, right?
Yeah.
But the bumper music was always like Wargasm,
right?
Stuff like that, and it was awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
And you'd be in the pit, and even at the Slapshot shows when Choke would be talking about if there's some. Well, you wouldn't talk about it. It was sort of implied, I suppose, that if somebody wasn't a skinhead, they were a target.
Right.
I'm not talking shit about him specifically, but just the general feeling. But it wasn't overt.
Right.
And there was definitely a feeling of like, hey, the scene is so small that it's cool. And I mean, like in Swampscott was probably similar. Where I was at Newport, we had a place called In Street where it was all rocks and benches, and we hung out, ripped butts, and you had skinheads, you had punks, you had hippies, you had the deadheads.
Yeah,
and it was okay because we were all just the dumbasses, and it was cool.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's where I remember going up one weekend and going. I think behind the main strip there, sort of behind there was.
I mean, it was basically the Harvard Square of my little town.
Yeah. It was a cool little town to grow up in. Definitely, I think. In that area, I'm kind of, I wouldn't take that away. I liked because I kind of liked that, we could go into the city and just, all of a sudden be in this, crazy hardcore show where people are jumping on your head and kicking people in the face, and then go back to.
It's like I remember one of my first trips to the city. I was I don't know, let's say 14 maybe. Me and my buddy Adrian jumped the train. We went to a Bruins Day game, skipped school, got into North Station, started walking around. We were really early, and there was a beer delivery happening somewhere on Causeway Street, and the beer guy on his truck dropped like a 6-pack or something, and there it was. And we were 14-year-old kids or whatever, and our mission was to find a buyer, and that was really hard, really tough to find a buyer back then. So here these orphan beers were on the street. And it's busy. It's Causeway Street, It's middle of the afternoon. And I'm like, fuck it. I reach down, I grab a beer, put it on my shirt. He does too.
Yeah.
We go into this restaurant, run into the bathroom and shotgun the beer. and we're looking at the door expecting a cop to come busting in with a nightstick.
Right.
And we realized this is the city. People don't give a shit. Like, even if the cops saw us do that, they got more important things to worry about. They got to go brace the Chinese joint down the street for their, monthly vig or whatever. They got more important stuff to do.
That's funny. Yeah, and we were lucky enough to live on the train. You could just take the train right from Newburyport, went straight into Boston, and same with me in Swampscott.
Well, we didn't have the train back then. The train stopped in Ipswich.
Oh, okay.
So we had to drive to Ipswich and park there.
Oh, okay. Nice. And then, did you ever spend time like north, like up in like Portsmouth, and there's a lot of.
Did I ever?
Yeah.
Good question. Like I said earlier, when Sawtell used to have those parties, and I met the Murderers guys. I mean, I would never have joined the Bruisers if I hadn't been to that party.
Yeah.
The Dover House with Larvae. He calls himself Lenny Mental these days.
Yeah.
Larvae was ground zero.
Yeah.
The Murderers, that band was ground zero. So we go up to Dover House. Larvae gave me my first tattoo.
Oh, nice.
Right there in his kitchen, baked the needles in his oven, all that shit. Right. And, that's where I probably first heard, the Dead Boys and all that stuff that you have to hear to not have your head screwed too loosely.
Yeah.
And that was so important to me. And to this day, I love that guy. I mean, absolutely, I love the guy. He just got in a big motorcycle accident. He's all right, but he got fucked up. You know, they like Larvae, some of those guys played in Gigi's band for a while. They went down, they were going to be on Morton Downey Jr. They went to the hotel the night before the filming, and I think put the you know, the Bible in the toilet and might have done some things on it.
Yeah.
The show was canceled. But that whole crew was literally integral to my musical path, or whatever you want to call it. If I ever say the word journey, you can shoot me.
Or angular guitar.
Oh, fuck. No, you can say angular guitar, but only if you're talking about wire.
Right, yeah,
That's
exactly.
the only band you can use it for.
I know, right? Literally. So the Bruisers, you left them in the mid-90s?
96, summer of 96.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then they kind of went on, and then you've done Death and Taxes.
Yeah, I can connect the dots for you. When I left in 96, at the time my last record that we did was called Up in Flames.
Mm-hmm.
Went over like a fart in church. And so going back to what you said earlier about, you know, just being tired of the attitude and you know, having to answer questions about, oh, are you a skinhead? All that crap. I was so over that. I mean, at the end, I was wearing anything I could wear to not look like that.
Yeah, I know.
And there's a few pictures, not too many, but, you know, I got like the sandblack goatee and the grease-backed hair.
Yeah.
And, you know, fucking engineer boots and whatever, just anything else. And I was into Stray Cats, so I bought a big Stray Cats guitar. And so the other guitar player in that band after Rick passed was Robert Garceau.
Yeah.
And so Robert quit at the same time I did. And at the time it looked shitty. I think the guys in the band probably thought it was pre-engineered, and it totally wasn't. But so Robert had a band called the Hellions, or Skinny Tim and the Hellions, maybe, at the time. And I think it was probably July that we both quit. And maybe in August or September, I started coming up just to play, because I was going to play. I was still a kid and wanted to play. And I had these instrumental tracks that I was doing with my buddy Sully. And I said, hey, let's try out some of these if you want. And we did, and it sounded cool. So we did like an open mic in Portsmouth at the Press Room. Yeah. Jim Tierney did an open mic thing, and that became the Cadillac Hitman. We recorded 2 or 3 records for the next several years, almost 10 years, I think. And then after that, was doing another thing called ZFE, which I'm not going to spend any time on. But then that band turned into Death and Taxes. So Death and Taxes did a record in like 05. I think Bruisers reunion in 05 kind of was the catalyst for that, because at the time I was doing instrumental music, and I remember turning to Mike from Death and Taxes and being like, you know, hey, as he remembers it, I think he's reminded me, I said something to the effect of, I think I still have a couple of songs that I can write, or something to that effect.
Right.
And so I did that, and that was Death and Taxes. And we did that for 4 or 5 years. Yeah. I also played at the time with Mark Lind from Ducky Boys, played guitar for him. Yeah. And did a record. It was good. We had a good time. Great people.
Yeah.
Nice to be allowed to, you know, as a senior citizen, be allowed to hang out and play shows, and people still show up.
You know? Yeah, exactly. And so speaking of that, the Bruisers are playing a couple shows next month in November.
Yep.
So how did those come about?
Well, like I said, when Al broke up the band, he did a couple of records after I left, and finally took the Dropkicks gig. Yeah. I think he's been doing them now for 20-something years. It's got to be at least 20 years.
Yeah.
It's a long time. Yeah. And so since then, we've done reunions like clockwork every 5 to 7 years, you know. Yeah. And the last one was, we did a 3-night thing in 2016, and now this is, you know, we're probably wrapping it up. I think this is probably it, and we're going to do It's my first time in Europe.
Yeah.
They did Europe back in the day a few times when I was in the band, but I couldn't go. I had a family back home. I couldn't afford to lose my job to go for a month and lose money. So this will be my first time. We're playing the Sound of Revolution festival in Eindhoven, November. I don't know. It's the first Saturday in November, whatever it is.
Right. Nice. And then you're playing Boston and Providence.
Yeah, but not until we prove that we can headline a Saturday night after. Get this, okay? Get these bands that we're supposed to headline over.
Okay.
These bands, you might have heard of them. Let me just name check you here. Sure. Band called Youth of Today. You ever heard of them?
Yeah.
Bouncing Souls.
Yeah.
Last Resort.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, are you shitting me?
You guys are playing over these bands?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not complaining. They won't. I think obviously because Al's gone on to do great things with Dropkicks, there's a demand there, and I think there's also an undercurrent of people that remembered seeing us when they did tour in Europe.
Right.
But I mean, those are legends to me. And the fact that we're on the same bill with them is amazing to me. So that's going to be amazing. So we're doing that. Then we come back and play Boston at the hell is it? I guess they call it Royale now.
Oh yeah, it used to be the Roxy.
Right. So we're going to do that first weekend in November, second week in November, and then the next night we're down in Providence at FET, which is apparently a new place that holds about 950,000 kids.
Yeah, I think that's literally the day before I come home from. I'm going to California for a week to.
Good timing.
My dad and friends, and I know, and I live right near Providence now, so that's usually my go-to for shows. But
well, I'm sure there'll be enough cell phone videos on YouTube. You can pretend you were there.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you guys? So with something like this, will you guys get together and rehearse out here, or?
Yeah, that's the reason why these don't happen too often. I mean, I'm living in Chicago.
Yeah. I figured everyone's all over
the rest of the guys. Scotty lives in Mass. Al lives in New Hampshire, but he's rarely home. Dan lives in New Hampshire. Richie lives in New Hampshire, and we're kind of using. We've had a lot of members. Richie was the longest serving bass player, but we also had Johnny Ryu, who's a very important member of the band. So he's coming over to do the Europe show with us, and then Richie's going to do the U.S. shows.
Right. Nice.
So Johnny lives in friggin' Texas,
Right. Yeah.
So to get together to practice costs a couple grand.
Yeah.
And so those guys are playing every week back home at Dan's place, and I'm playing here in my living room, Madison Square bedroom, and I was back there last summer when I was on vacation back there in Maine, and we practiced a couple times. It sounded good. Cool. So the week before the show, I'll fly back. We'll do 2-3 days of hitting it hard.
Yeah. Nice. And do you play music up in where you are now? I
have a home studio. I've done some like guest things. I did a guest thing with AF when they did Iron Chin.
Yeah. Nice.
So I recorded a solo remotely for them on that record. I did the Johnny Ryu Cowboy record.
Yeah.
I just did Mark Lynn's new record remotely for him. As far as playing out live, I've done a couple of live solo electric gigs here in Chicago, but not enough to mention. It's not something I'm really working at.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we can wrap this up. I appreciate you taking the time to blabber about this stuff. I think it's important to, just document this stuff. I think we all had a cool time, and
I mean, we could make it really boring and do like a Joe Rogan podcast where he talks to Lenny Clark and they're talking to like inside stories of doing coke at a fucking club in 1980.
Yeah, I actually was literally just listening to that on my way home tonight. It was his accent, Lenny Clark. After a while, I'm like, okay, but
it is what it is.
But this is,
going to Rocket. I mean, I could tell stories. I mean, I think you were probably the guy that turned me on to, like, the Goo Goo Dolls.
Oh yeah.
And but I'm talking about not what people think of today.
Yeah, like the
I remember they opened for Circle Jerks at the Channel.
Yeah.
and it was amazing.
Yeah.
And that was on the Jed record.
Yeah.
And I think I remember showing up at Rocket. It was either you or Al.
Yeah.
But one of you was like, "Yeah, they got a record out called Hold Me Up."
Yeah.
And at the time, I was really into the Replacements.
Yeah.
I had found the Replacements somewhere in a record bin, and I got Hold Me Up. I'm like, wow, this guy really, really, really wants to be Paul Westerberg. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
And for a couple of records, he was.
Yeah.
But hey,
yeah,
we could do that all night.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks again for doing this, man.
Thank you very much for having me. This is awesome, and I love the podcast, and look forward to hearing some new cool episodes.
Thanks, man.